Welcome to Pointy End. I'm Keith Sutherland. Today is a well-known jeweller around town, Mr. Martin Ruffell, and first-time author. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me.
Now, you've got a new book coming out, and how the hell did you get involved? A jeweller decided to write a book, and it's the first time you've ever done anything like this, but how would it come about?
Well, I never thought to write a book particularly, but when I met John Forbes, and it was at the exhibition of his sports memorabilia at the Town Hall back in 2012.
Yep,
I'd heard about him, but never met him. And my wife Lisa, who was the mayor of the city at the time, organised it. She had met him through the Bendigo branch of the Blue Ribbon Foundation. So she was a member of that, and that's how they met officially. So I've heard about the legend, but never met him. So that weekend, John came down from Bendigo, where he resides, and he spent the whole weekend sitting there talking to people who came to see the exhibition. And I spent a bit of time with him, just sat there and listened to some of the stories. And I thought, wow, you know, this, not realising the quality of the man and what he'd done. I went to bed on the Saturday night and I couldn't sleep because I was thinking, someone needs to write his story. I wonder if someone's written his story. And so when I went back on the Sunday morning, I said to John, I plucked up the courage. I didn't know him, you know, from bar of soap, basically.
Pretty gutsy.
Yeah, well, looking back, I think it was. And I said to him, John, has anyone written a book about your life story? And he said, I've written about my early life growing up in Bendigo and what have you, but no, I haven't really finished it. And I said, do you mind? I mean, I'm not an author, I'm a jeweller, as I explained. I said, do you mind if I have a crack at it? And he said, Marty, I know you can do it, which was a really strange thing to say when he didn't really know me. But so that's where it started. So that was in the November of 2012. And then I sat down with him, went up to Bendigo a number of times and virtually interviewed him, recorded the conversations. And then I had the issue of, well, how do I put that down on paper? Because I thought, well, do I write it as me or do I write it as John? And what developed and what I found was the easiest was to just write what he said and edit it and put it into context and all that sort of thing. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, I remember that event well because lucky enough to get the invite from your wife, Lisa at the time being mayor, and part of it, and John had been on my back for years and years to come up and have a look at his collection along with everybody else, and you never have more hospitable people than
exactly.
It's just fantastic, but
yep.
To see the memorability he had. But to get started on the book, basically you talked about his early life, the hardships at Bendigo, coming off the farm, drought and all those sorts of things. So
yep.
That's obviously the first part of the book, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. And he tells it in such detail that you can vividly sort of paint a picture in your own mind of what the times were like and the environment that he grew up in and the experiences he had. And it's fascinating, it really is. And I mean, I do have a background in reading biographies. I do like reading other people's stories. I always think that other people's stories are more interesting than my own. I suppose that's where that comes from. But you know, I read books on, say, John Cleese, Eric Clapton, Molly Meldrum, you know, a number of them. So I mean, I do have a bit of a fascination for other people's stories.
Yeah. And once you go up to Bendigo, as I said, Faye is just amazing, his wife. And,
yeah.
And then they moved to sort of Melbourne, he got involved. But I believe that Herb Elliott had a very big influence in his early days and how he was sort of doing scores for the country football with the former 3CV. And then it sort of grew from that from his early days. So I just want to enlarge a little bit on that. And then we'll go on to his major part of his career.
Yeah. John had always had an interest, obviously, in sport and local sport, community sport. And so when John realised that there was nothing there for people who went to the football to read about what had happened the week previous, that he came up with the idea of collecting all the stats and putting it in some sort of format. So that's where the Yabba and the Long Valley football guide came about. So, and he met Steve Bright from now Barton Print, who was an apprentice at the time for a company in Bort, and he got together and said, well, this is what I'm thinking, and put it together basically. And it hasn't missed a week since, and it's something like 30 odd years. So they print, Barton Print does it for a number of the local football, like the Heathcote League, Loddon Valley League, etc. So, yeah.
Yeah, amazing from sort of that early beginnings, and as you said, he was always interested in sport. His son was interested and went down to Carlton.
Yes, he was drafted to Carlton.
And then it was sort of, things in the bush weren't too good, and John became a bit of an expert with sporting clubs, incorporations.
Yep.
I believe that's how he really got his start into doing other things from that, incorporations, by addressing groups of sporting groups and things like that.
It's hard to believe, looking back, that in those days there was no incorporated bodies for sporting clubs. So if you had an accident, you couldn't sue, or there's no way of doing that. So he came, or a group of them came up with the idea of getting together with all the sporting clubs and visiting right across Victoria and talking to sporting clubs about incorporation and their liabilities and so forth, and insurance. And he invited Herb Elliott up to be a guest speaker, and that's where the Herb Elliott associate connection came from. But and Herb offered him a job at that point. Said, if you ever think come to Melbourne, I've got a job for you. And John just sort of took that as being, one of those things that people say. So, but it was sometime a few years later when John made the move to Melbourne, primarily to support their son with his football career, that he re-met Herb Elliott, and Herb said, well, why haven't you come to see me? So John went down to Moorabbin, which is where Puma was based, and Herb Elliott was the CEO of Puma at the time, and offered him a job. And John thought it was just the promotions manager for Victoria, and it ended up being the national promotions manager for the entire company of Puma. John was a little daunted by the thing, but it was obviously his ideal job, and he's such a personality that he attracted people to him. His office was just an array of almost memorabilia in itself, with pictures of athletes that he supported, and some of the names of the athletes that he's in his top 60 are just the who's who of elite sport back in the 80s, 90s and 2000s.
It's quite an incredible one, and having listened to him and spoken on this program, we talked about it, and I said, well, who's your top people? And he absolutely loves Merv Hughes.
He does. He's number one.
Merv coming to the launch of your book. But then he went on to Adam Gilchrist, Jason Dunstall, and all these amazing stars. Shane Crawford. There's who else have we got? Warney. All the guys, and it was probably testament to, and that's where I really learnt about the character of the guy, having been involved in the testimonial cricket 2020 cricket match in 2011, and I was on the committee, and all these people, and I thought, how can anyone know all these things, and are they really going to come to the country and play a cricket match, which was an unbelievable day when it was washed out.
Yes.
But raising $100,000
amazing
causes, and we'll come to those as well. But to see the calibre of the people that were just in awe of what he had done for them at the starting of their careers. And,
yes, and they've never forgotten it. That's the thing.
And you think of the Channel 9 personalities. You've got Ian Healy. You've got former captain Mark Taylor and others that were down here, wouldn't have missed it for the world, just to play with John Forbes, who was
Adam Gilchrist flew in from Perth, and just an amazing array of people.
It was, and it was just, and to be involved in that day was one of the highlights of my sort of smaller fundraising career, but to be there and watch some of those people. The other thing that he went on to sort of start, which a lot of people are not aware, was he sort of was involved with the Tyne and Eyre Foundation, and then went on to the Blue Ribbon Foundation. How did that really come about from those early days?
John heard about the deaths of those two officers, and he was so moved by it that he virtually drove straight to police headquarters and went in and said, what are we going to do about it? This is crazy. We need to raise some money for the families. There was no family support for officers back in those days. So John, with his connections through Puma, organised the Glass House, which was the basketball stadium back in the day, a basketball game, which was the Puma All Stars versus Melbourne Tigers, and it was a phenomenal event. They raised somewhere near $100,000 to give to the families, Tyne and Eyre families, but the Tyne and Eyre families refused it and said no, they much prefer it go to a foundation, and that's where it was born out of that tragedy.
And therein follows sort of the blue ribbon, because as I mentioned, the cricket match was about $100,000. There was 50,000 thereabouts went to the Inglewood Hospital, and 50,000 went to the Bendigo Hospital. And from the foundation, the blue ribbon, which has grown from strength to strength, and I've been involved with Lisa with the blue ribbon in Bendigo, and the amount of money that has been raised for hospitals is just an amazing thing. That this was something that sort of John had started. And,
exactly.
and I guess the community don't really know, and I think this is fantastic what you're being able to do. And it's not just Australian people that are the stars either. You go on, and in your book you talk about some of the international sportsmen, Linford Christie, Serena Williams, and the South African cricket team, and so on, that how John, the guy from Idioma, had such an affinity with all these international people, and everyone loves him when you meet John because he's such a personable guy. Magnetic
personality is what I put it down to.
That's the best way of sort of describing him, that magnetic personality, because once you know him, you're attracted to him, you're a friend for life.
Exactly.
And you'd do anything for him, and he'd do anything for anybody, basically.
And I've got to admire Faye and the rest of the family who have allowed me access to their private lives. From someone who didn't know them at all to now being basically a very good friend of John and the rest of the family. And that's been a privilege, really, to be able to be involved in putting it together.
And it is a privilege. And the thing that I would really love to see, and I think John would love to see, and your wife Lisa would love to see, is some sort of to have all that memorabilia that he's got up at his farm up there is just incredible. It's not just signed autographs of pictures and T-shirts and jumpers, but there's also all those ties. And I said, what the hell are you doing with all these ties? And there's just dozens and dozens of ties, and he's swapped with people and international people that he's sort of come across. But the thing about what I love about John, he's so humble, and there's no airs and graces about him.
Not at all.
He is just one of us.
Yes.
He's a normal, knock-around sort of a guy.
And that's probably part of being able to relate to sports stars. He doesn't treat them as being on a pedestal, he treats them as everyday people.
Yep. Well, Martin, it's obviously been a huge job for you, running a jewellery shop with your son, of course, David, and all the other things that you're involved in as well. But to be able to sit down, put the time, it must have been a daunting task when you think back, I want to do this, having to ask him to do it. It would have been nerve-wracking. And then to get to this point where now I believe you've got your launch coming up on the 7th of April at the Kangaroo Flat Sports Club. So just give that a bit of a plug, because the book is coming out, what happens on that night, and where do people sort of access, and where do we buy a copy of your book?
Merv Hughes is the special guest at the launch on the 7th of April at the Sports Club. It's an invited guest list at this point, not open to the public. The book is available on the Forbesy, which is the name of the book, Forbesy, that's who he's known as, Forbesy Facebook page that I set up. People can pre-order the book there. Copies of the book are $25 plus $5 for postage. And I just stitched up a deal with Harry Hart, who has from Dimmicks in Bendigo. Big plug to Harry. He's happy to sell the book. He won't make a zack out of it. The proceeds or the profits from the book sales, 50% will go to the Blue Ribbon Foundation, which is John's preferred charity, and 50% will go to my preferred charity, which is Rotary International. So.
Well, Martin, congratulations, well done, and to you and Lisa, your contribution to the Bendigo community is sensational. You've always been generous to myself with fundraising and things like that, but this is a pinnacle, I guess, and when you look back at some of the things you've done, but this is quite an achievement, and to have your launch on the 7th of April, as I said, Kangaroo Flat Sports venue, is something to behold, I would have thought.
Yeah, thanks very much. I must say, in the back of the book, there's a lot of, there's a section there on testimonials and anecdotes, and there's a myriad of people who wanted to jump on board and say, tell their stories about John, and also just back up some of the stories that John tells in the book.
Yeah, well, and when you look at him, so you've got John Harris, which is synonymous with cricket here, and he's been involved. And you've got David and Eddie, you've got the good of being champions. You've got all these people, Glenn Ridge, that are all just good mates with Forbesy. So you've obviously, and I've only had a brief look through your draft copy of the book, and it's going to make terrific reading.
Yeah, thanks.
So congratulations once again, and well done on a great effort.
Thank you.